much, Mr. Stewart. Thank you to all of our witnesses. I'll now recognize myself to begin the question portion of the hearing, and just want to thank you all for the tremendous work that you've been doing in the community, particularly during the last couple of years. I remember visiting the Vista Distribution Center for the food bank with my wife, and there were people in line to receive food who used to volunteer at the food bank, never believed in a million years that they'd need the food themselves. But the pandemic is, particularly in the early stages of the pandemic, it just really did mean that all of you had to go above and beyond, and that, of course, included all the work that you've been doing for our veterans. So truly grateful for that. Ms. Brackey, as you heard on our first panel, VA, I think you heard on our first panel, that VA recently updated the clinical screening tool for food insecurity from 1 question to 2. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our friends from VA and from USDA for sticking around. Even though you all came out for this, you'd be amazed. Sometimes the folks from our agencies do not stay for the second panel with our VSOs and with our community organizations. Personally drives me nuts. So I'm grateful that y'all are still here. But again, from 1 question to 2 for the clinical screening tool. Can you discuss the importance of how screening tools are formulated to ensure that they're accurately and adequately capturing those at risk of or experiencing hunger? And do you have any recommendations for how VA could further improve the screening tool?
Thank you, Chairman Levin. I will just reiterate my recommendation that you also look at household income and household size, and look at the household income, because that will tell you whether or not the household has enough money to make ends meet. When a family doesn't have enough money to make ends meet, they're making those trade-offs that some of my colleagues were talking about. The screener is highly effective, but the shame and the stigma and the fear of admitting that you can't provide enough food for your family keeps a lot of people from responding. So the recommendation is to combine both.
Got it. And as we look to identify ways to further engage veterans and their families in accessing available nutrition assistance programs like CalFresh, what other recommendations or best practices do you want to share with the committee?
The process is, hunger relief program, the hunger relief sector in general doesn't really work as well as it should. It's very easy for people to fall through the cracks. We have created something that we call the Hunger Free Navigator training, which is a 90-minute training, and it teaches people how to effectively refer and connect people to food assistance. So that kind of a training of all VA frontline staff would be especially beneficial, I think.
And are there any specific barriers that you believe prevent the veteran population specifically from getting food?
I think that they're probably the most, as was mentioned earlier, the most proud and the most ashamed. When our national level rhetoric continues to look at SNAP as a bunch of freeloaders, how do we expect our veterans to go with pride and ask for help? Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Mr. Castillo, I'll turn to you. Many federal relief measures were instituted throughout the pandemic to help alleviate the hardship on families across the country, including an increase in SNAP benefits. Did the San Diego Food Bank see any changes in demand for its services and resources when these relief measures were in place and when some of those relief measures expired?
So yes, we did see a large increase, doubling in many cases for both food and SNAP benefits. Last year, we just closed our fiscal year on 6/30. The year before that, which captured most of COVID, we distributed 60 million pounds of food. This past year, we distributed 50 million. So a large part of that is the that we've exhausted federal funds that we received because of COVID. So we did see a decrease within the last 12 months because of that.
Thanks for that answer. Mr. Stewart, I'll turn to you. Is it possible for you to give us a rough estimate of how many veterans Us for Warriors serves that are not connected to VA healthcare or benefits?
Thank you for the question. Trying to run the statistics in my head right now.
Roughly.
Roughly. So we're a small organization. We roughly take care of about 5,000 a year. And I would say that with the VA program, it's more targeted, and it's I would say about 100 or a couple hundred a year on that.
What kind of difference in outcomes, especially as it relates to hunger, do you see for veterans who are connected to VA resources?
I wish that they would be connected more, and we try our best because one thing, we talk about stigma, and it is there, and we talk about pride and all the things associated with service. I've 20 years in the military. On top of that, 13 working for the government associated with the military. I've seen it all the time. It's very hard to ask for help. When you go to the VA, you're not going there for food insecurity. You're going there because you have a condition, and you're going there because you have something that you are getting service. So sometimes food, I had to ask myself, food was secondary to the reason why I go to the VA for care. But working with the Food Empowerment Program since 2017, when everything first started, I share with you that even though they were not full-time dedicated employees, just for the scope of that, couldn't find a more compassionate group that dedicated of their own time to be part of the Food Empowerment Program in order to make sure that the word gets out and all the things in place. I was excited to hear about having more coming to the table for that. Hope that answers.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and it's really encouraging to hear that. I just have a few more questions. I'm going to power through these. Ms. Samayoa, I was really heartened by your testimony regarding the Courage to Call campaign, the program that 211 San Diego operates to help military and veteran families navigate the care network in our community. You mentioned that many who use Courage to Call are not aware of the existence or eligibility for nutrition assistance. Do you have any suggestions for how federal and local agencies can better ensure that our veterans have access to this information?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think from our experience, more proactive messaging campaigns upstream, and even thinking about different ways of doing handoffs with folks that might be vulnerable. We found that to be effective with certain vulnerable populations rather than pumping out a bunch of messaging and hoping something sticks. Having some sort of partnerships where there's some direct handoffs with people that we know could use help so that there's community of agencies that could partner and support that person with whatever resources they need. So my recommendation is not only more messaging and more education to get the word out about the different programs that exist, but looking at different partnerships and abilities of using technology of connecting people proactively.
What recommendations would you have around the stigma associated with these programs? I've heard this from a number of people. Any thoughts on what we need to be doing to address that?
That's a tough question because I think that's part of a broader, narrative. But I think educating people on the power of food benefits, on how food is health, showing people, how CalFresh could stretch your food budget, your grocery budget, and your household budget, I think is really important. And then having these kind of checkpoints at different places like the VA, like in hospitals, like in other settings. So it's like a familiar resource and it doesn't seem as so that we could help destigmatize that.
And Ms. Brackey, I'll close with you. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, and they attend our local public school district. And what I saw during the pandemic was just a remarkable number of kids that didn't have enough to eat. For many, that meal that they got at school was the best meal. I knew theoretically that problem was a huge problem, but to actually see it and experience it and walk through our school districts here in the community and understand the magnitude was really striking. And the data that you quoted in your testimony related to child hunger at military installations was just heartbreaking. I really appreciated your support for the Stop Child Hunger Act. That's a bill that I introduced to make the summer EBT program permanent, and also my Military Dependents School Meal Eligibility Act, which would allow military dependents to be directly certified for free meals at school. These are important bills that we've introduced. Can you please discuss the unique circumstances that military families face while serving that limit their access to nutrition assistance, and how these issues can continue on as a service member transitions out of the military and into civilian life?
Well, I'll start with the access issue in military. Again, we need to look at what is making people reluctant to seek help while they're enlisted. But then we also know in an area like San Diego County, with such expensive rents as we discussed, and the very high basic allowance for housing, that basic allowance for housing increase puts them out of SNAP eligibility range.
Yeah. Thank you.
I might,
go ahead.
but
Please proceed.
I do. I think that's excluding the basic allowance for housing from the SNAP eligibility is a great first step. It's a great intermediate aid. But the ultimate issue of paying our service members enough to make ends meet is the real underlying issue to fix. And I do want to applaud you for your support of pandemic EBT. We saw how successful that was, and we know that the summer meals, summer service programs don't work for today's families, and so summer EBT, we continue to advocate and support and thank you for your support of that legislation.
You have it. Well, we're all in to get that across the finish line, and I do know with our National Defense Authorization Act that we're going to be going back to Washington to hopefully pass this week. We are going to be advocating for a raise for our active duty men and women, I believe 4.1%, which it's not enough, but it is a step in the right direction. So with that, thank you for your